Hello and welcome to a new interview from MinnMax. I'm Ben Hansen, and MinnMax is a Patreon about games, friends, and getting better. You'll notice there it's games, friends, and getting better. It's kind of a broad theme, and normally we focus on video games. That's the centerpiece of MinnMax overall. But, we have wide-ranging interests. And so this is an interview with Sarah Scoles talking about doing UFO research. If you've been following pop culture over the last 5 years, it has become this resurgence of UFO discussion. New York Times has posted several very interesting articles talking about what the government knows, what they don't know. Harry Reid's out there talking about it, former senator. It kind of feels like it's a below the radar, which is frustrating, discussion of, well, of course UFOs exist now, moving on. But absorbing yourself in this culture can be incredibly frustrating. And you want to know what to believe, what to be skeptical of, what's my North Star here? What is a rock that I can stand on when it comes to talking about UFOs? And so in this interview, we talked to Sarah Scoles, who wrote the book They're Already Here, UFO Culture and Why We See Saucers, about that. She's researched this world for years. She lets us know what she believes, good sources, bad sources, what has holes in it, what's going on out there. So it's a little bit different. We hope you enjoy this interview. If you want to listen to the podcast version of this discussion instead of on YouTube, you can support us at the $5 tier at patreon.com/MinnMax. 2 ends. You also get early access to the MinnMax Show podcast. Watch later Leo Vader's video essays. The audio podcast versions of The Deepest Dives are huge community game clubs and a lot of other fun bonus stuff like that, including all former interviews, future interviews, everything under the sun. Okay, without further ado, here's Sarah Scoles. Sarah Scoles, welcome to MinnMax.
Thanks for having me.
We need you. We need your help. So here's the problem. We've been hearing a lot of things about UFOs lately, and it's very nice to want to believe in this stuff, as the old saying goes, to become obsessed with this stuff. And I'm sure you're aware of this. It's a minefield out there. You don't know what to believe, which way is up, what the New York Times knows, how that connects to other things. So can you just lay it all out for us and explain exactly what's going on with the state of UFOs in the world these days?
Oh, wow. That's the multi-million-dollar question, I think.
Yes.
I think our saga started a few years ago in December 2017 when the aforementioned New York Times told us all that the Pentagon was running this UFO research program. And I think then all of a sudden, a lot of people started to take UFOs seriously who had not even really maybe thought about them before, because if the Pentagon is interested in them, why wouldn't the rest of us be?
Exactly.
Right. So since then, things have kind of progressed along that military and political front to the point where now we have three, I think, official videos from the Navy that show these things that they classify as unidentified aerial phenomena. And now there's an unidentified aerial phenomena task force of people who are investigating sightings, and politicians are getting political briefings and et cetera, et cetera. But,
okay. Oh, yes.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, we have a lot to get to. That's a beautiful summary, unless there's a huge but coming up here.
But I'll make the but quick. Just there's a lot of complications, and it's unclear what everybody means when they say UFO, and what different parties are interested in. And so, even though it seems like an exciting story, I think it's not quite as straightforward as all of that. But okay, back to you.
Well, let's spend the interview just unpacking everything there. I'm curious, what is your history as a journalist? Where do you come from? What's your life like these days?
My life these days, first of all, involves being in this room quite a bit, like the rest of us, I'm sure. But my history as a journalist is I started writing for Astronomy magazine about 8 years ago, because I came from an astronomy and physics background, and then just kind of took that route into journalism. And so I've been writing about space science and the cosmos and the satellite industry and all kinds of things in orbit ever since then, which eventually, I guess, probably leads everybody to UFOs.
And so then you wrote the book, They're Already Here, UFO Culture and Why We See Saucers. Is that just a matter of like, well, it's a fun beat, but if you want to get headlines for this beat, we should probably start talking about UFOs? Is it as simple as like this gravitational well of interest?
I think that is how it happens for a lot of places that cover UFOs. I mean, people are going to be interested in them. People are going to click on those stories. And I think also a lot of journalists, just like a lot of people everywhere, have a genuine interest in this thing that is a mystery. And so I think it's a combination of all of those things. And for the book, I decided that, I was never going to solve everything about what UFOs are and what's going on. So I focused actually more on the subculture and what's up with all the people who are part of it.
What's up with all the people? Do you feel like UFOs are becoming more and more of your beat? Do you feel this pull with the book now, or you're just becoming a UFO person instead of just a science person?
I don't actually. I write mostly about other things now. And actually, while I was working on the book, most of the articles I published were not about UFOs, but I write about these other things, what satellites are going up, what's the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration up to, and then I just obsessively trawl, the UFO subreddit or UFO Twitter or things like that. But I haven't actually written very much about UFOs since the book came out.
Okay.
Just a lurker.
Okay. Just culturally,
Yeah.
You like to stay aware of everything.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know what it's like to go down the rabbit hole of reading the book, or even just, after the book, just trying to stay on top of this culture. Can you just walk us through that process? How you sort through sources? How do you not just get mired down with bullshit and arguments? What is that descent like?
Yeah, there's a lot of bullshit.
Okay.
And there's a lot of arguments. The signal to noise ratio is not great. But anytime I'm trying to learn something about a subculture that I'm not really part of, honestly, the first thing I do is listen to a bunch of podcasts about it, because the UFO podcasts are very insider, and you kind of quickly learn about what people care about and what they do not, and then you can kind of get a handle on the minutia of what's going on in there. So I do that. I lurk around those Reddit forums and Twitter posts and things like that. But it is hard to figure out who's for real and who's not. But in general, like anywhere else, it kind of lines up with money, like who's in it for the money versus who's in it for the genuine interest, I think helps you sort the wheat from the chaff pretty well. Yeah.
And so who's in it for the money?
Naming names.
I don't know how much you want to get into this, but you look at somebody like a George Knapp. And so, just laying all this out, like I've always loved UFOs and all that stuff going back to my childhood. And then I think it's this New York Times stuff that's been bubbling up. And it's like, along with a lot of people, I am obsessed with this. I want to learn more. Naturally, I think then that pulls into Joe Rogan with his very popular podcast. He's had a couple episodes with, George Knapp was on one. We can go into specific guests on there later, Bob Lazar, stuff like that. But regardless of how you feel about Joe Rogan or UFOs, it is a compelling listen. It is fascinating to go down this rabbit hole. But then the more you go down, the more you start realizing there's some holes in this boat. This is not as rock solid as I wanted it to be originally. So at this point, what is true, Sarah? What is going on out there, please?
Well, let's see. That's a super hard question. I think first I will say something about the coverage of UFOs, if that's okay.
Yeah, please.
And it's just, I feel like a lot of people who write or do interviews about UFOs are believers themselves, or hardcore want-to-believers. And so we'll take a story and take someone's word for it. And I think that is not always super productive for UFOs, and that they deserve a critical look just like anything else. But as far as what is true, we do have 3 videos of supposed UFOs that come from the Navy. And the Navy says that it classifies them as unidentified aerial phenomena. But what's tricky about even that is that they count unauthorized things under this category, and they also count things that someone can't identify right away, but maybe could potentially identify later.
Unauthorized things? What does that mean?
Something that flies, in restricted airspace when it's not supposed to, but is not necessarily unidentified. It's just not supposed to be hanging out there.
So, like the Tic Tac and things that we've seen in the UFO footage, it's like that's just ruling in the possibility it could just be a happy birthday balloon that floated through some airspace that they technically classify the same way?
Yeah, their definition of what they call a UAP, because they don't want to use the word or the term UFO, says unidentified / unauthorized, kind of putting them on equal footing. And that's kind of all the information we have. So we're not really able to differentiate between unauthorized and unidentified.
Okay. Can we just talk about it's the Navy videos? The Navy is the
Navy videos.
Branch that released this? Why did they release this? How did this come about? Who pressured them? What did they get out of it? How is this happening?
That is a long story, but I'll try to make it short.
Please.
So 2 of the videos first came out in the initial New York Times story from 2017. And those actually were not authorized for public release. The man who says that he was the former director of the Pentagon UFO investigation program had applied to get these videos authorized for public release, had not actually gotten them authorized for public release, and then they showed up in this New York Times.
So this is Lou Elizondo?
This is Lou Elizondo.
So
yes.
In theory, he leaked these videos to the New York Times, or somebody in his proximity did?
Yeah, I'm not sure who gave them to the New York Times. I don't think we have that information.
Okay.
But he was the one who applied for their release.
Okay.
But then later, more recently, they were officially released publicly. But Lou Elizondo is part of a group called To the Stars Academy of Arts and Science, headed by everybody's favorite musician, Tom DeLonge, formerly of Blink-182.
This is why it's so hard to keep track of what is happening.
Yeah, so it is a sea of names and acronyms, but Lou Elizondo left the Pentagon, joined an organization headed up by Tom DeLonge, and they are attempting to get information about UFOs out to the public.
Okay.
And make some money.
Okay. How do you feel about Lou Elizondo on his own? No doubt he worked for the government and headed up this UAP research within the government, yes?
Not quite. No doubt he worked for the government. He was part of the Department of Defense, but the Department of Defense will not confirm that he worked for the UFO program. They actually said he didn't have any responsibilities related to it. So
they acknowledged that it exists, but did not connect Lou to it.
Correct.
Do you believe Lou Elizondo?
I reserve judgment until I have evidence. Either way, I would like for either the Pentagon or Luis Elizondo to provide some evidence that he either did or didn't work for it, and I haven't seen it yet. So
okay, and within the government circles, it seems like a big spokesperson again and again is Harry Reid, the former senator from Nevada, who got this program rolling, or does he have a connection to Lou Elizondo's program when it wasn't the government, or can you just explain his role in all of this?
Yeah, Harry Reid helped set up the initial program when it started around 2007. It was run by a contractor that was in his state, Nevada, and he was convinced of the importance of studying things like this and helped just get the program up and running, and was its major supporter.
And this was Bigelow?
This was Bigelow, yes.
Okay.
Bigelow Aerospace.
Okay, so he's a very rich man that then connected to Harry Reid to get this program up and running.
Yes.
Okay, and then just to make it more confusing, Bigelow is a guy who also owns Skinwalker Ranch, where a lot of other freaky stuff has happened. People have reported crazy things, and also it should be expected because it's called Skinwalker Ranch. It seems like a nightmare.
Leave nothing to the imagination. He actually sold it a few years ago, so he doesn't own it anymore. But he did own it, and he ran a bunch of paranormal investigation programs before the UFO program from the ranch. And then I guess after he didn't find anything that satisfied him, he sold it off.
So this is the dream. This is the best. So it's this billionaire guy. I think, was he on 60 Minutes? I feel like I saw a profile on him somewhere at some point.
Yeah, I think it was 60 Minutes.
Okay, This billionaire guy is aware that there's this freaky ass ranch where a lot of paranormal stuff is supposedly happening. He just says, well, I'll just buy it and just research it for years. Then finds out, it turns out nothing crazy happened, or it wasn't worth his investment, and ended up selling it. Is that the general idea?
Yeah, that's about right. I think that he might disagree with the conclusion. He wanted to try to gather this scientific data, and the scientists who were working on it, their conclusion was not that nothing was going on, but just that it was very sneaky stuff going on, and it basically knew when they had instruments watching and wouldn't pull its dirty tricks.
I see. So. And you actually went to Skinwalker Ranch for a piece for Wired, right?
I did.
What was that like?
I hoped it would be a little freakier than it was. I just drove out there kind of on a whim a couple of years ago. And there's a very helpful website called skinwalkerranch.com, which will tell you where you can set up a little outpost just on the boundaries so you're not trespassing on anyone's private land. And I just, I hung out there. I listened to the audiobook version of Hunt for the Skinwalker while I was sitting outside waiting for freaky things to happen. And I think the most freaky thing that happened was just, getting stared at by the security cameras on the ranch. But, it's pretty. It's a desert. It's a nice town. But yeah, I didn't get any vibes or anything.
Yeah. Well, you're listening to an audiobook. You have to take the ears out and really soak in the environment and wait for the spooky things to hit you.
Just trying to set the mood though,
Right. How much of your job over the last 5 years has been doing those types of things about the ghost hunting equivalent of okay, I'm going to drive to this hot spot and then just sit there for a while?
I worked on the book. They're already here for about 1.5 years. So it was a significant part of that time hanging out at Area 51 in a place called the UFO Watchtower, Roswell. But nothing crazy ever happened to me, but maybe I wasn't open to it.
Yeah, but it makes you appreciate, I'm guessing, the culture. I'm sure there's a lot of really great people out there that are into this, and then also probably people who are a little bit too into it. You want to just talk about navigating that scene and just trying to figure out who can I bond with here?
Yeah, I had a very specific mindset going in where when I went to talk to people, I would want them to know where I stood, that I wasn't a true believer or anything, but that I was going to treat their story respectfully. So if I went to this place called the UFO Watchtower and was talking to someone about, an alien abducting them from their bed every night, I wouldn't, make fun of them in my book or in person, but they would know that I wasn't coming from the same place. So that was kind of how I navigated it, was just setting myself up slightly in contrast to a lot of people. But yeah.
Nice. I know this is too big, but what did you learn after all this? Did you learn anything new? Are you hanging your hat on anything new about this is actually the most interesting beat or subset of this that people don't focus on?
Uh-huh. I think the major takeaway I had was that there is something that unites the people who are interested in UFOs kind of, not casually, but maybe agnostically, and aren't out there. They're just very intrigued by them, and the people who are very true believers. And that's that, they are both interested in the fact that this is kind of not exactly an unsolvable problem, but one that you could work on just forever, because there's always new stuff. There's always new signal. There's always new noise. And you could just kind of dedicate your whole life to trying to figure this thing out and never actually do it. And I think whether people themselves see it that way or not, they find it very compelling.
Yeah, and the idea of never figuring it out, that's been the story of my life here with the rise of cell phones. I remember thinking oh my God, everybody has a phone in their pocket. It's game on for Bigfoot, game on for UFOs. We've got this. And I'm probably not hanging out on the right Reddits or something, but it's it hasn't been bubbling up to the degree that you think that it would if there was something out there, and now that everybody has a phone in their pocket. So it's okay, my hopes are depleted. And then the New York Times stuff bubbles up, and then it's okay, so it is real? There are UFOs then? This is getting back to the beginning, but how much faith do you put in the New York Times articles? Because there's the one recently as well that was just very clear about the government has materials that are not from this world from crash sites that they're researching. Can we believe that? What's your take?
Well, there was a quote actually from Harry Reid kind of saying that in the story, but then they had, I don't know if you saw this part, but they had to issue a correction where he said, no, that's not what I said.
No!
I'm sorry. Always the bubble burster. He said, I don't have it exactly offhand, but it was a definitive thing in the story. And then what the correction was more it is possible that this could have happened at some point.
Was he the only one quoted in that article saying that? I thought there was some other quote from somebody saying that they had some different materials.
There was another person in there named Eric Davis, who is a scientist who's done a lot of UFO work and has done work with Robert Bigelow and things like that throughout the years. I can't remember exactly what he said specifically, but he has been involved in testing materials that people think are from what they call, I think, off-world vehicles. But as far as I know, no one has ever found anything that was truly anomalous. And a lot of my problem with the analysis of these scraps that maybe come from spaceships is that people act like it's impossible to figure out what they're made of, or like we have this great mystery. What could this piece of metal possibly be? But like every university has a lab where you can find that out. It's just not that hard.
Right. And then it's always a thing is when pressed for those types of details, a lot of people just kind of dodge it a little bit. Like, oh, well, we didn't have the right equipment. We got to do more research. We'll get back to you. And it's just the proof's in the pudding at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm waiting on the pudding. But
how deflated should our balloons be if we're really jonesing for UFOs? Is it 0 out of 10? Is it 2 out of 10? Where should we be at?
I mean, I think we can have some faith that the military is worried that there are things in our skies that maybe they can't identify or maybe are just beyond what we thought other people had, or beyond what some people in our own military thought other people in the military had. So there's definitely something strange that people are concerned about. I would say that's reason to be a little excited and maybe find out what it is. I wouldn't hold out hope that there's secret evidence that there's alien spaceships cruising around.
Okay, so based on everything you've researched, if you had to guess right now, you don't believe that the American government has wreckage of anything?
Wreckage of a crashed alien spaceship?
Yeah, materials of some ship that our culture did not design.
I have not seen any evidence to suggest that is the case. No. So based on what I have in my knowledge, no, I don't think that's the case.
And just because you mentioned going to Roswell, I know this is almost a different chapter, but going back to that era and like the Project Blue Book stuff, are there any conclusions after all that? Can you give a quick summary about what we know about the early era?
Yeah, so the government ran a series of investigation programs for a few decades, kind of in the mid-20th century, the longest of which was Project Blue Book. And what a lot of people find most interesting about that is that in every investigation program, there was this percentage of stuff that they could never explain. So there's always been unknowns. And so it's kind of unsurprising that there are unknowns now in what people see. And, you know, those projects are actually what give people a lot of suspicion about what the government is up to, because a lot of people say, and there's evidence to support this, that Project Blue Book was kind of just meant to provide prosaic explanations for what people saw so that we would all, you know, calm our shit down and not freak out about the aliens. So that if you saw, oh, this thing was just Venus, you'd probably think, oh, the thing I saw was just Venus too. So a lot of people don't trust those, and that means a lot of people don't trust what's going on right now. And I think that's a reasonable pattern to draw.
Do you trust what the American government is telling people about these things?
I think that, like most things coming out of especially military and intelligence agencies, you know, we're mostly only going to find out what they would like for us to find out. And the statements they've given are purposefully vague, like the fact that the definition of UAP is unauthorized / unidentified. That's not an accident. It's confusing and vague on purpose. And I think so. They haven't. I guess it's hard to know what to think. And as a guy named John Greenwald, who has studied UFOs and government documents for a very long time, has said, if you muddy the waters so much, they'll never clear up. And I think that's a lot of what's going on is issuing vague things that people can interpret how they want, and then never letting anyone actually know what's going on.
Do you have any sense of who in the government would know? Like, you even see interviews with presidents and they always just like joke and deflect, which drives me insane. Because I feel like my entire life it's been people interviewing president's like, hey, how about those UFOs? And the president makes some X-Files reference and they move on. It's like, no, like, hold them to it, please. Like, even Trump, I think, like, you know, Tucker Carlson asked him about it and Trump's like, I don't know, I guess I had one meeting about it. I don't really believe it. Moving on. And Tucker seems to be obsessed with this topic. And even he was like, okay, good enough for me, Mr. President. It's like, what? No, squeeze them for like half an hour on this, please.
That's what, maybe you could get him on the show.
Oh, do you have a contact to the President of the United States?
No, you're on your own there. I got nothing.
Okay, that's fine.
I mean, I think it's hard to say always, but I mean, right now, the part of the military that's most interested in UFOs is the Navy. So I think, you know, someone in the Navy would be the person who would know the most at the moment. I don't know who that person is.
Okay. But, so there is the Colonel Fravor. Is that his name? Okay. So he was connected to the release of that footage of like the Tic Tac UFO, as they called it. So he saw this UFO in 2004, and then on a subsequent run, some of his buddies actually filmed it, and then like from the plane, F-22, I forget. And then that's actually the footage that's released there. You know, he has a big interview on Joe Rogan's podcast. It's fascinating. Does not seem like a bullshitter. He's just coming at it from the camp of, I saw something crazy. Everybody that I was with saw it too. Then we actually got footage of it, and now it's released. And the craziest thing to me is that part where he's like, yeah, nobody talked to us. Like, no man in black came and said, don't talk about this or anything. It all just seems so open. What is your take on his story?
Yeah, I mean, his story is very compelling, although people who are more expert in, you know, fighter jet camera footage than me say that what's on the film doesn't match the description of what he said. You could say it's a different day, but I mean, he's a hardened fighter pilot who sees a lot of things. And this seemed to have genuinely spooked him or mystified him. And that's, I mean, there's a lot to be said for that. And there's other military personnel who also saw it and have come forward, including, you know, radar operators. But actually the openness and the fact that I believe none of the 3 videos we have now were ever classified.
Right.
It tells me that what we're seeing can't actually be that interesting, because if you know anything about government secrets, like, they'll classify extremely mundane things just because they can. And so why, if this was evidence of alien spaceships, wouldn't it be classified, you know? Well,
doesn't that just lead to the theory that they don't know what it is? And it's just like, yeah, there's some weird thing in this footage. Maybe messaging didn't work its way up the chain or to the side of the chain, however, to lock this thing down, because there's no conclusion. It's not like they're trying to hide aliens. It's just, we don't know what the hell's going on either. Yeah, there's some footage that shows something confusing, and now the public can not know what the hell's going on. What's the harm in that?
Yeah, I mean, that could be the case too. And here we are.
So that's the thing, is like, you know, we hear so much about Colonel Fravor, but you don't hear from his, you know, the other people that were in the plane with them or on the ground. But you think that story's rock solid, that everybody else has come forward. It's just he's the only public spokesperson about that day and what they saw off the coast?
I don't know about I have no way to know if the story is rock solid, because in the end it is just a story, and every human being, even a pilot, is, you know, our brains are not that great at observing and interpreting things. And I don't know who all else might have seen that or might have come forward. There is a lot of stigma involved in talking about UFOs, especially if you're a serious person. And so it's possible people didn't want to do that. There are pilots who don't report, or who haven't in the past reported things because they were afraid of ridicule. And so it's possible that's what's going on. But I mean, I think in the end, it comes back to what you were saying at the very beginning, which is that there's just so much. It's hard to know what's true and what's not and what's going on.
And what's your take on the granddaddy of it all, Bob Lazar, who worked for a secret site, he says, in the 80s. I think it was in the late 80s. Then he told George Knapp, is that his name? The journalist, and the story got out there talking about S4, not exactly Area 51, but another secret site where he actually worked on an alien craft. He touched one, he went inside of it. all this stuff. He had an interview on Joe Rogan's podcast. And again, it's so tough to read into this, but like, feels honest enough for me. It passed my smell test. How much faith do you put in the Bob Lazar story?
The amount of faith that I put into Bob Lazar's story is commensurate with the amount of evidence he's provided that it's true.
Okay, so forget the idea of he sounds believable. You just only care about hard evidence.
Pretty much, but I mean, I think that is part of why his story has lived on so long and had such an effect on culture. I mean, he's essentially the reason that we think there are alien things inside Area 51. Like, he's the genesis of that whole thing, is because, like, you can't prove him wrong. I can't prove him wrong. Like, nobody's letting me into Area 51 to show you, like, yes, here's a spaceship, or no, there's not. And so it can kind of just live on forever. There are some, problems with his story. He doesn't have the education credentials that he says he had. And people say, oh, well, the government wiped it, or, we don't have evidence that he actually worked there at all. And then people say, well, why would you if it was a secret? And so it gets to live on because there's just not a way to prove it right or wrong.
But there's that weird detail about he made some jet bike and then it was in the newspaper. In the newspaper, they said that he worked for Los Alamos, and then, yes. But that maybe he just told the reporter that at the time, or what's your take on that?
Well, he was, I believe, in a Los Alamos internal phone book, like an employee phone book also. So it does seem like he did some work for them.
So working for Los Alamos as some sort of contractor is still a far cry from you actually worked in Area 51 or S4?
I would say so. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's a long drive from one to the other to start with, but.
Okay, sure. So what does I know you're not a psychologist, you don't want to break this down, but what do you think he gets out of telling the story every once in a while? It's not like he's out there selling Bob Lazar t-shirts. So what's in it for him?
No, and I mean, he actually has not, like, after his initial interviews, my understanding is that he really didn't seek out press and kind of disappeared and didn't really give interviews, didn't start BobLazar.com or anything like that. Yeah. You're right. I'm not a psychologist and I can't speculate, but I will tell you what someone else told me, someone else's opinion, is that it started, as a good but untrue story, and then nobody expected it to blow up the way it did. And once you say something and it makes international news, you can't back down from it. You have to keep going. And I'm not saying I believe that, but they basically said, he got over his skis telling a good story.
And so now it's just so many years, it's just baked into his head, so he can sound completely confident, being like, yeah, there were 9 ships. I only saw the one, and I don't know, this detail's a little bit fuzzy. Like, he's just vague enough to make it seem viable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, since I've never met Bob, and I can't speak to his psychology, I'll say this in general and not specifically about him. But if I go out and tell a hypothetical lie to someone, but I say it enough times, I start to believe it's true myself, and that is part of human psychology too.
Okay, so if you had to put the verdict down, you would say Bob Lazar, not so much?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, because the school stuff gets fishy, and he is vague about, like, I had friends at school, but none of them have spoken up, as far as you know.
Right. And I mean, if it's hard to keep a secret that big. It seems improbable that he would be the only one to have come forward, and also that, nothing's happened to him. Yeah,
but nothing happened to, the pilot who also saw this stuff. It's like, and that one has footage to back it up. So no one's coming down and killing people from the government, right?
True. That's true. And Luis Elizondo didn't get in trouble for how the videos he had possession of came out before they were supposed to. So nobody's getting in real trouble for anything, turns out.
No one can ever get in trouble. This is dumb too, but what is your take just on these interviews being on Joe Rogan's podcast? The podcast is so huge. It, I believe, is what got the ball rolling for the storming Area 51 thing with the Naruto run. What's your take just on the resurgence from that podcast and that culture?
Yeah, it has a huge audience, and I mostly don't listen, but I do listen when he interviews UFO people, and it's compelling in a long form interview where people just get to say what they think and have experienced. Is like, it's a good format, and I understand why people like it. But when there are big claims like this, Joe Rogan's kind of mode is to let people say what they want, and he'll challenge them on some things, but it's not a hardball interview, I would say.
Yeah, every once in a while he'll speak up and be like, that sounds like bullshit there. Like the filmmaker who's always partnered with him is always a bit much.
Yeah, and I think he did challenge Bob Lazar on a few things, if I recall correctly. But I wish that people who were doing research into these things were given more time on podcasts like that too, not just the people who had experienced things and had their own experience, but the people who have the wider perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, getting back to Harry Reid.
Okay.
What has he said, and how much faith do you put in what he's saying? I mean, in terms of people that they'd lose a lot of their credibility if they're just completely pulling this out of their ass. It seems like that's a pretty good source for this stuff, right? Is he like the one true north source from the government about what is real in there?
I don't have a catalog of everything he's said, but he has stood by what they call the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, the Pentagon's program, stood by the fact that researching this is an important thing to do for national security. And I think that does lend a lot of weight to the topic. I mean, he was majority leader. He's been around in politics for a long time, and people take him seriously in all the other aspects of his life. And so I think they do the same here.
Do you think a lot of this just comes from, he had this connection to a billionaire and with Bigelow, and then Bigelow was funding this program. So bada bing, bada boom. That's the story, is just this guy had a lot of money, and then a politician wanted some of that money, and then UFOs came out as a side story of that.
It is hard to tell, but it is true that Robert Bigelow was a donor to Harry Reid.
Okay.
So Robert Bigelow donated. Harry Reid helped Robert Bigelow get money from the government to research UFOs, which Bigelow himself had already been funding research into for more than a decade. And so it's hard to say if that kind of political monetary backslapping is primarily what was going on or not. But it's definitely a part of the story.
Okay. Yeah. That connection to like Bigelow and private companies was one of the most interesting details in that latest New York Times article, where it talks about how I think, people had been briefed within the government, and then also some people from the private sector had also been briefed on these otherworldly materials, crashed spacecraft, stuff like that. What do you make of that? I mean, are they bringing in, I don't know, who would you bring in? The head of Boeing to like walk through this stuff? Or what's your theory on who these people are and why?
That is a good question. And I think the story was amended slightly also about who was briefed. I think it was downgraded a level on who was briefed, like it was staffers of politicians, not them themselves, and not like a briefing, but they were briefed. So it's a little less formal than it was initially presented. And I don't know who that would be. And I don't know who the contractors would be, but I will say that the former executive with Lockheed Skunk Works, which is Lockheed Martin's super experiment aviation and aerospace division, is part of this organization with Tom DeLonge and Luis Elizondo. And so if you were going to take a wild guess, that might not be a bad direction to look. Okay.
That he is involved in these briefings in some way just to try and get some...
just that there's already a connection to Lockheed Martin somehow.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. But we also, this organization to the Stars Academy also does have a contract with the Army to do research on some of their materials. So,
do you put a lot of faith into the Stars Academy, or what's your read on that as an organization as a whole?
I think that they have made a lot of large promises about the information that they have about UFOs, the information they will release, and what they will do with it. At the beginning of their life, they basically said that they were going to reverse engineer some kind of spacecraft that was formerly unidentified. And we haven't seen a lot of that so far. What we have is a little piece of what they call metamaterials that they believe might be from a crashed object. We have a couple of videos, and then we have a lot of media that has been produced, like books and music and T-shirts and things like that.
So that's an example of, okay, just put up or shut up, put this thing in some scientific lab and just show us the evidence right now, please.
Sure, yeah.
Okay. This is so frustrating. Okay, so the New York Times thing, if we had to zoom out on that saga, you think it's just that newspaper inching a little bit too far, trying to get a sexy headline, and in the result, confusing a lot of people, but there is a core nugget there?
I can't say the paper's motivations for publishing the story.
Yes,
I don't
you can.
know for sure. I can't.
It's a good click. What are you talking about?
I mean, every media organization cares about clicks.
Yeah.
In general, I think I would have liked to see stronger evidence backing all of the stories that they have published about UFOs than there has been. I think there's been a lot of hand waving and a lot of like, we know how we got this information, but there's no way for you to determine who our sources are or how we are backing up what we're saying, but you should trust us because we're the New York Times.
Right.
And, I don't trust anybody. So
that has become very clear. Okay. But again, what we know is the military and other folks have seen strange objects moving in ways that cannot be explained, and that there is footage of that the government has acknowledged is real footage of something that's weird.
Yes. I wouldn't say that it can't be explained, but minus that part, I agree with that. And we also do know that this program did exist from 2007 or 2008 to 2012 that allegedly studied UFOs. Like that's true also. And there is now a task force to study the same thing, and all those things are real.
Wasn't there something about the government saying that program is over and done with, but they were lying? That's actually not true?
Yeah, there's still a little bit of debate about that. The government says it stopped funding it in 2012. And Luis Elizondo and others say that it continued, maybe under a different name, maybe, bootstrapping without funding. I haven't seen the evidence to support that myself.
Okay.
Yet,
so if you, with a scientific mind, had to have a takeaway for what this is, let's just focus on what we know for sure, which is the government and those little videos. What do you think it is? What's the likeliest explanation? If you want to be as cynical as possible, what is going on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. We'll preface with that. I'm, it's my job to not make conclusions until there is evidence. But I think that, when the government has spoken about why it's forming an unidentified aerial phenomena task force, it talks about, and other things in the past, it has talked about foreign technology, threats to national security. It's not talking about aliens. And I mean, of course, it probably wouldn't, even if that were the case. But I think it's likely they're concerned about foreign technology, or I think it's possible it's also an attempt to broadcast the availability of technology that we have so that everybody knows, like, hey, look at this cool stuff we've got. But those are two hypotheses. I don't know.
Wait, so
are true.
In that second scenario, then it'd be that the government is researching its own technology in a way to just get that out there?
Yeah, I guess that's what I'm saying.
That seems nuts.
Like I said, it's a hypothesis.
Yeah, I'm totally on board for the idea that the government doesn't know what it is. They're scared about it. And so we should research it. But what is it though, Sarah? Just tell me, please.
I don't know. I wish I knew. I wrote a whole book and I didn't figure it out.
I really thought at the last page, I really thought it would just pop right through. I mean,
what do you think?
I'm in the camp of, I believe that there's life out there, but I think this is fantastical, but I think it's too much of a stretch to think there are humanoid creatures nearby that would have visited that would have ships like that. You know, I always just think when it comes to like alien life, I think, God, best case scenario, we find life that is resembling a seahorse. Like, crazy coincidence that we could evolve that in that same realm, right? It's like, that would be a miracle to find that in another galaxy. And so the idea that we'd have these aliens then be so close to us is really odd. And also, it's just a dumb thing I was thinking about today, too, about just... No one has for sure seen an alien, but it's so weird that we have just... If I say to a 5-year-old, draw an alien, they know exactly what it looks like. Like, how many things that no one has seen is there an agreed upon look of? That's such a weird idea. Anyways, to get back to my original thought. So I'm in the camp that if these ships are out there or whatever it is out there, it's some weird alternate dimension, time traveler, something more connected to us than we want to admit. Ta-da! Something like that?
I like that. And I mean, I think something connected to that is that it's interesting and suspicious that all our UFOs, at least, you know, from the mid 20th century to now, mysteriously, they kind of take the form of like a little bit better version of our own technology. You know what I mean? Well,
yeah. Okay.
Like so these ones look like great drones, like really great drones.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And I guess, I mean, when was the Frisbee invented? I'm trying to think of like, you know, the classic like, you know, 50s UFO and stuff like that. And like, if there'd be any connection to that spinning thing. But I mean, you said they look like drones, but I mean, from the footage that's released, like, I don't know what the hell it is. It's a weird gray dot. And so it's not really looking like anything.
That's true.
But that's the only thing we know for sure. But you had some point in another interview I heard with you where you talked about like, if these things were real and they're all over the place, you've done a lot of research on satellites and covering the satellite industry. You could just zoom in and there you go. There's a UFO footage because we've had satellites covering the Earth for so long. Does that add a huge pile on one side of the scale for this stuff all being nonsense then in your mind?
Not yet, I don't think, because I don't think anyone has really used that satellite data to look specifically for that stuff. I think that somebody could, do that. And there's a company called Hypergiant that is actually trying to do that. They're basically trying to create a UFO detector that will use things like satellite data and other, you know, mostly image-based data, figure out based on flight paths and like the characteristics of known aircraft, like what's something we can rule out as uninteresting and what's left after we take that all out, and then look at that and say, you know, how common are weird things in the sky? What characteristics do they have? Do they share characteristics? And so I think, as far as I know, they're the first people attempting to do that kind of systematically.
And
so
you put a lot of, okay, well, that's promising, because if that happens, then can we just say within the next 20 years, we'll know for sure what's going on? Like if these satellites are constantly looking at us, that's it, right?
Yeah, I mean, you could always say that the ships fly too fast to be caught on a camera or something like that. So
the Skinwalker Ranch stuff.
Exactly.
Okay.
Gets to live on.
Does it bum you out that a part of your job is just to bum other people out by saying that all these things are full of holes?
Yeah, it does. Because like the truth is, if it weren't something that I found exciting and interesting, it's not something I would have spent so much of my time researching. But I actually think, you know, the editor on my first story that I wrote for Wired about UFOs was like, listen, if we're going to cover this fringe thing, we need to really establish like why it's an important topic for people and why it deserves serious scrutiny and rigor. And the bottom line is, like, if you have a claim that UFOs exist and they are alien spaceships, like, that's arguably the biggest discovery that's ever been made, right?
Yeah.
And so for the biggest discovery that's ever been made, you need a commensurate level of scrutiny. And if you want it to be taken seriously, you have to take it seriously. And so all I want from the UFO community is to treat its own topic with as much dedication as I think it deserves, if that is the conclusion we're going to draw.
Are you going to stay in this field? Do you want to stay on top of this arena for moving into the future?
Yeah, when I finished the book, I thought that I was going to leave because it is, like you said, I don't love bumming people out. And also, there's a lot of UFO trolls on the internet, and I kind of wanted to get away from it all, but it's very hard to let UFOs go once you get into it. So, like I said, I haven't been writing that much, but I've been incapable of not following it all. So I will at least remain an obsessive news consumer.
Oh, good. Is there anything else we can look at? Anything else you would point us towards for just good sources, non-BS type stuff out there that's, I know, not going to be at the level of that video footage, but just any other cases or anything to wet our whistle?
Let's see. I think the coolest sighting that I came across was one that happened in Iran in the 1970s, which is pretty famous. There's a bunch of declassified government documents on it. I think it was 1976. So if you Google Iran UFO, 1976, you would probably find it. And these pilots went out, chased something. They said it turned off the systems in their jets. There was a mothership. Little tiny ships came out of it. Multiple people saw it, and then later, in a U.S. Air Force manual, they cite that incident as like, here's how if you're a pilot, you're probably going to see some weird stuff up there that you can't explain. Take this thing, and so at least back then they were taking it seriously. And as far as I know, no one's explained that.
All right,
and
that's
as far as sources, I really enjoyed the work of Jack Brewer. He runs a blog called The UFO Trail. And he just kind of gives historical and social context to everything that's going on in UFO world. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Well, hey, anything else you'd like to plug? No, I think that's it. There's got to be something you want to plug. Your Twitter account, anything like that? Okay, sure. My Twitter account is at Scoles Sarah, SCOLES SARAH. And my book is They're Already Here, UFO Culture and Why We See Saucers. Perfect. And when the next New York Times article comes out, can you be sure to call back in and then just give us the lay of the land and exactly all the holes in the story again? Definitely. Always glad to poke those holes. Perfect. Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you so much for watching or listening to this bonus interview from MinnMax overall. If you like the show, you can help support more interviews in the future by supporting us at Patreon at patreon.com/MinnMax, 2 N's. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye. MinnMax is a Patreon about games, friends, and getting better. The Deepest Dive is the best, most thorough discussions about games on the internet. Prove us wrong, please. The MinnMax Show podcast airs every Thursday. Patreon supporters vote on what we stream every single week, and a whole lot more. Give us a shot, try subscribing to the YouTube channel, and we hope we can win you over.